I'm not suggesting Queen Camilla lacks authority, but that tiara isn't hers. It rightfully belongs to Catherine, the Princess of Wales, for the Christmas gala at Buckingham,
At 8:45 on the morning of March 9th, 2026, Princess Anne did not raise her voice. She did not have to. The very second Queen Camilla made one final, desperate plea to stop Catherine, Princess of Wales, from stepping through the heavy wooden doors of the throne room, Anne shut her down, with a silence so bone-chillingly cold that every aide in the hallway froze. The decision was already made. The internal struggle was over. Without uttering another word, the Princess Royal extended her hand to Catherine, turned her back on the Queen Consort, and led the future Queen toward the historic chamber that would permanently alter the balance of power inside the British monarchy. If this sudden collapse of palace authority surprises you, hit that subscribe button right now before we expose the secret paper trail that made this moment completely inevitable. Camilla stepped forward into the quiet hallway, her voice visibly shaking as she demanded one final delay to the morning's proceedings. She warned that letting Catherine through those doors would send a devastating message to the public. It would not look like simple preparation. It would look like an immediate replacement. Beside them, Catherine remained completely motionless, caught in a humiliating crossfire, knowing that every single second made her the visible target of an institutional war she had never asked to lead. Anne did not soften. She told Camilla that the decision no longer belonged to private pride, personal fear, or household influence. A confidential council had already cleared the path. Catherine was stepping inside because her expanding responsibilities beside Prince William now demanded access to state intelligence, once strictly limited to the sovereign and his primary advisors. King Charles had signed the operational directive himself. That single fact completely shattered Camilla's leverage. What truly wounded the Queen Consort was not just losing the argument, but realizing her own husband had bypassed her authority without warning. Catherine looked toward Anne, and the Princess Royal gave a small, unyielding nod. Clutched tightly in Anne's hand was the crimson folder containing the signed order, yet one hidden page inside that folder remained completely secret from Camilla, and the fear of what was written on that page was far worse than the rejection she had just suffered. The atmosphere within the grand corridor felt heavy, almost suffocating, as decades of silent palace protocol began to unravel in real time. For years, the internal dynamics had relied on a fragile understanding, a quiet agreement that personal sensitivities would be respected alongside state duties. But the realities of the king's current reign had forced a hard shift in priorities. The institution could no longer afford the luxury of delicate diplomatic delays when state continuity was at stake. Every senior staff member standing along the perimeter of the hallway understood the gravity of what was taking place. Orders from the sovereign are meant to flow seamlessly through the household apparatus, yet for months, subtle obstacles had been placed in the way of Catherine's constitutional training. Secretaries had noticed the subtle shifts in memo distribution, the sudden scheduling conflicts, and the unusual delays in security clearances. What had once been brushed off as administrative friction had finally exposed itself as a deliberate effort to keep the future queen away from the core mechanisms of governance. Hi viewers, do you think Princess Anne was right to step in and enforce the king's order against Camilla? Or should she have stayed out of the household dispute? Let me know your thoughts in a comment down below. The corridor went dead silent as Anne began moving forward. Catherine followed. She carried no triumph on her face, only the crushing weight of what waited beyond those heavy doors. Behind them, Camilla stood completely frozen. This was not an act of spontaneous support. It was ruthless institutional enforcement, Someone had systematically built the case, secured the king's ink, and chosen Anne as the only person strong enough to execute the blow. To understand why Anne backed Catherine over Camilla without a second of hesitation, we have to pull back the curtain on the private fears, secret loyalties, and deep wounds eating away at the royal household. 3 women, 3 entirely different futures. Camilla terrified of being erased from the reign she spent decades fighting to enter. Catherine terrified of becoming the weapon used to publicly destroy another woman, and Anne, hardened by decades of duty, is forced to make a brutal call: protect family harmony, or protect the crown from an internal fracture that could destroy its future. Anne has never cared about public applause. She has spent a lifetime putting the institution above personal comfort. That made her the only individual capable of delivering a painful strike without seeking personal gain. She saw that a single act of internal jealousy could destroy public trust in the monarchy William is destined to inherit. Catherine's burden was different. Years of strict discipline had prepared her to stand beside the future king. Yet every step forward seemed to trigger Camilla's defense mechanisms. In a private conversation with William, Catherine admitted she did not want another woman publicly diminished in her name. But she could not retreat from state preparation. Camilla had already confessed her deepest terror to Charles behind closed doors. She admitted that her standing seemed to shrink the moment the younger royal entered the room. No title had been stripped. No public statement had been issued. Yet attention was shifting. Advisors were listening to Catherine. The future was arriving before Camilla was emotionally ready to release the present. The complex reality of the situation was that Camilla's fears were not entirely baseless within the context of royal history. When a new generation ascends, the older branch of the family inevitably finds its sphere of influence contracting. The transition is historically painful, often accompanied by a quiet reduction in private access and public prominence. Camilla had spent years earning her acceptance from a skeptical public and a protective palace structure. Seeing that hard-won standing threatened by the natural shift of generational priority created a deep, reactive impulse to protect her authority by any administrative means available. However, the private household apparatus had underestimated the determination of Princess Anne. Anne operated under a strict code where institutional health superseded any individual's personal comfort. She recognized that allowing private anxieties to dictate operational access to state papers was a dangerous precedent. If Catherine's preparation was delayed now out of sensitivity to Camilla, the entire structural readiness for William's future reign would be fundamentally compromised. Charles heard the fear in his wife's voice, but he also recognized the grave danger. The king was trapped between his marriage and his duty. He offered comfort, but he refused to block Catherine's path. That silence left Camilla exposed, pushing her private office toward a desperate gamble she would soon regret. Anne was already tracking the red flags. Inside a private ledger, she had been documenting moments where personal rivalries disrupted state functions, delayed briefings, restricted access, intercepted dispatches. It was a documented timeline pointing straight toward Camilla's staff. Prince William discovered the final straw. An intercepted memo revealed that the Queen Consort's office had secretly filed for an administrative delay to stop the throne room briefing entirely. Charles had authorized no such delay. William knew instantly that this was no longer a simple misunderstanding. It was direct interference. The boiling point came during a ceremony meant to show absolute unity to the world, when one deliberate trick pushed Anne's remaining patience past the point of no return. Anne held the urgent dispatch that had just been handed to her outside the throne room doors. She read the paper once, She folded it slowly, her eyes locked onto Camilla with cold finality. The private war inside Buckingham Palace had just spilled into the open, and there was no turning back. To understand the full weight of the dispatch Princess Anne held in her hand outside the throne room, we have to look back to a rainy Tuesday morning at Westminster Abbey. It was the formal rehearsal for the Commonwealth Service, an event meticulously orchestrated to display royal stability to millions around the globe. Every step was measured, every position carried historical weight. Seating order was not merely a matter of courtesy, it was a public declaration of raw power and immediate access to the king. Catherine arrived expecting to carry out the schedule approved by King Charles weeks prior. She was meant to stand beside Prince William and receive a private constitutional briefing from senior household officers immediately following the service. But just 9 minutes before the rehearsal began, an aide stepped into the holding room, carrying a revised placement card, catalogued in palace records as Document CS 2026 POS. The new card changed everything. Catherine's name had been shifted 3 rows back, separating her from her husband and quietly reassigning her state briefing to another royal office. The justification printed neatly on the official paper read, "Visual hierarchy adjustment." It sounded routine. It looked like a simple administrative tweak, but it was an aggressive move designed to erase Catherine's rising authority right in front of the entire household staff. Catherine did not raise her voice. She did not argue with the aide. She slowly folded the card in half, slid it inside her handbag, and maintained a flawless, serene expression. But beneath that calm exterior, the humiliation was absolute. Princess Anne saw the entire exchange from across the Abbey floor. She knew that silence in the face of boundary violations only invites further erosion. Within 2 hours of the rehearsal ending, Anne confronted the senior staff manager to demand who had cleared the sudden schedule change. The manager hesitated, shuffling through files before admitting the order had originated directly from Queen Camilla's private secretary. Yet when Anne cross-referenced the change with the king's primary registry, she discovered the truth. King Charles had authorized no such adjustment. Someone had used the Queen Consort's office to overrule the monarch's explicit command without his knowledge. That evening, Charles examined both placement cards side by side in his study. He looked at the original signed decree, then at the altered card from Westminster. He did not speak for several long minutes. The silence in the room was heavy with anger and deep embarrassment. The king realized that his own administrative apparatus was being manipulated right under his nose. Anne took immediate advantage of the moment. She requested an official, confidential review of every schedule change, dispatch delay, and seating modification involving Catherine over the preceding 6 months. This was not a casual inquiry. It was a full administrative audit of the household's communication channels. What the investigation uncovered was not a series of unfortunate coincidences. It was a systematic, quiet campaign. First came the subtle redirection of state dispatches. Briefings detailing emergency succession protocols intended for Kensington Palace were repeatedly rerouted to holding desks, adding days of unnecessary delays. Then came the double standard. While other household offices enjoyed immediate, unmonitored access to state updates, Catherine's office was subjected to redundant administrative checks designed to slow down her constitutional training. The patterns were undeniable. Individually, each incident offered plausible deniability. Together, they formed a deliberate blueprint aimed at restricting the future Queen's access to the machinery of the crown. Princess Anne quietly catalogued every single finding in her personal leather journal, Date, time, document reference, name of issuing staff member. She was building a case that could not be dismissed as gossip or emotional overreaction. Then came the discovery that accelerated the entire crisis. Prince William uncovered a secret memorandum hidden within a routine legal review folder. The document revealed that an unauthorized request had been submitted to delay Catherine's throne room continuity briefing, pending an unnecessary constitutional review. The request carried the official stamp of Queen Camilla's private office. William took the memo directly to his father. He made it clear that his wife was not seeking to eclipse anyone's standing, but he would not permit her constitutional duty to be sabotaged by private anxiety. The future of the monarchy depended on early, thorough preparation. Blocking that preparation for personal comfort was a risk the institution could not afford. King Charles read the memorandum, feeling the full weight of a divided home. He saw his wife's deep-seated fear of becoming irrelevant, but he also saw his son's absolute refusal to tolerate further interference. The king knew he could no longer stay neutral. Avoidance had only allowed the poison to spread deeper into the household. He picked up his pen and authorized the complete, unredacted administrative audit requested by Anne. The green light was given. The hidden machinery of the palace was about to be turned inside out, and no one, regardless of title, would be shielded from the findings. Armed with the official audit results, Princess Anne moved with surgical precision. She summoned Queen Camilla to a private sitting room, tucked away in the west wing of the palace. There were no aides present, no private secretaries waiting at the door, no press officers to manage the narrative. Anne placed the audit files directly onto the table between them. 14 altered schedules, 6 diverted dispatches, 1 unauthorized request for a legal stay. Camilla attempted to defend her staff, arguing that her primary goal had always been protecting the king's authority while he managed his health. She insisted that allowing multiple centers of royal attention would create confusion in the public eye and weaken the sovereign's image. Her voice carried the weight of decades spent defending her place within the institution. Anne remained entirely motionless. She did not blink. She did not raise her voice. She looked Camilla in the eyes and asked a single devastating question. How many times had household orders been altered without the king's explicit knowledge? Camilla tried to pivot to palace precedent, but the physical evidence on the table rendered excuses useless. The audit proved a consistent pattern of interference. The mask of routine administration was completely gone. Anne leaned forward, her voice dropping into a firm, unyielding tone. She reminded the Queen Consort that protecting Charles did not give anyone permission to humiliate Catherine or bypass orders signed by the king himself. Anne had no ambition for the throne. She had no personal score to settle. That neutrality gave her words extraordinary power. She was speaking purely for the survival and integrity of the crown. Under the relentless weight of the documented facts, Camilla's defensive posture finally cracked. In a moment of raw truth, she confessed why she had pushed for the delays. The upcoming throne room briefing was not just another routine meeting. It involved the Royal Continuity Directive, a document that detailed how responsibilities would be shared if the king became temporarily unable to carry out state duties. Including Catherine so directly in those plans felt to Camilla like the ultimate confirmation of her own fading influence. It was proof that the future was arriving faster than she was ready to accept. The fear of being pushed to the margins of the reign had driven her private staff to cross boundaries they should have never touched. Anne listened in complete silence. She understood the human fear behind the actions, but institutional duty left no room for sentimentality. She informed Camilla that the king had already reviewed the full audit. He had rejected the requested delay and explicitly authorized Catherine's access to the throne room. Then Anne revealed the ultimate leverage. King Charles had signed an executive codicil attached to the continuity directive. The clause granted Princess Anne direct authority to enforce the operational transition without needing approval from any private household office. Any further interference would result in the immediate release of the audit findings to the Privy Council. Camilla rose slowly from her chair, her face pale as the reality of her position sank in. The informal power she had relied on for years had been effectively stripped away by a single signed document. She warned Anne that enforcing the decision so rigidly would leave permanent scars on the family. Anne simply picked up the crimson folder from the table. She looked at the Queen Consort and delivered a principle that closed the discussion completely. She stated that if a promise signed by the sovereign is not respected inside the palace today, no one's standing will be worth the paper it is written on tomorrow. But as Anne turned toward the door, she revealed the major plot twist that Camilla never saw coming. The audit had not been brought to the king's attention by an enemy seeking revenge. When the dispatches were first discovered, it was Catherine herself who had privately petitioned Charles to ensure that no public announcement or disciplinary action would harm Camilla's charitable patronages or standing. Catherine had explicitly requested that the focus remain entirely on structural duty, refusing to allow the situation to be used to humiliate the Queen Consort. Mercy cut far deeper than punishment. Camilla realized that the very woman she had viewed as a threat had acted to protect her dignity when she was at her most vulnerable. Yet despite that private revelation, the momentum of the state machine could not be paused. The morning of March 9th arrived. The heavy doors of the throne room stood waiting. The private struggle was about to meet its final enforcement in full view of the household dispatches. Anne stepped out into the main corridor holding the signed directive, ready to escort Catherine through the entrance. But as Camilla made her last desperate appeal on the threshold, the urgent dispatch handed to Anne revealed one final surprise. A secondary staff member had just attempted to initiate an emergency lock on the administrative dispatches 90 minutes prior. Anne folded the paper, locked eyes with Camilla, and prepared to deliver the final, irreversible blow. The physical confrontation outside the throne room reached its absolute peak the moment Princess Anne folded that last urgent dispatch. The paper was crisp. The signature on it was fresh. It revealed that just 90 minutes before the doors were scheduled to open, a junior staff officer attached to Queen Camilla's private office had tried to issue an emergency administrative hold to lock the dispatches from the inside. It was a desperate move, a final, chaotic attempt to stall an outcome that had already been decided by the sovereign. Anne did not step back. She did not call for security or create a public spectacle. She simply turned to face Queen Camilla directly on the threshold of the historic hallway. Camilla's voice trembled slightly as she made her last plea. She warned that letting Catherine step past those doors at this exact moment would not look like simple training. It would look like an institutional takeover. It would broadcast to every foreign embassy and private secretary that the balance of authority had shifted away from the king's wife. Beside them, Catherine stood completely still. Her posture was perfect. Her hands were folded neatly in front of her, but the emotional toll was visible in her eyes. She was caught directly in the middle of a constitutional tug-of-war. Every extra second spent standing in that open corridor made her the centerpiece of a conflict she had spent years trying to avoid. Anne lowered her voice so only those within arm's reach could hear. She spoke with a calm, freezing precision. She told the Queen Consort, that the decision no longer belonged to private pride, lingering fear, or private household influence. The confidential royal council had already cleared the briefing. Catherine was entering the room because her duties alongside Prince William now required full security access. King Charles had signed the operational instruction himself. That single detail ended the debate. Camilla heard the words, but the true sting came from knowing her husband had authorized the move without giving her private office the power to pause it. Catherine looked toward Anne. The Princess Royal answered with a subtle, decisive nod. Clutched securely in Anne's right hand was the leather crimson folder containing the primary directive, yet one hidden page remained completely secret from Camilla's advisors. The fear of what was written on that unread sheet was far more terrifying than the immediate rejection she had just suffered on the threshold. Anne reached out, took the heavy brass handle of the throne room, and pulled the door open. The corridor went silent. Anne stepped across the threshold first. Catherine followed. She carried no visible triumph, no arrogant smile, only the sober weight of what waited inside that room. Behind them, Camilla stood completely motionless beneath the archway, realizing this was not a sudden act of favor. It was absolute enforcement. Someone had systematically laid the groundwork. Someone had gathered the evidence, secured the king's written order, and selected Princess Anne as the one person capable of carrying out the mandate without flinching. Inside the throne room, the physical setup was deliberate and solemn. Large mahogany tables held the master state dispatches and emergency continuity binders. Senior constitutional advisors, legal counsel, and state secretaries were already seated. They stood as Catherine entered. The briefing began immediately. Catherine was formally introduced to the emergency state continuity protocols, the operational framework that governs the crown if the monarch becomes temporarily unable to lead. It covered dispatches detailing national security briefings, regency procedures, and private military council communications. Accessing these files did not make her sovereign. It ensured that when Prince William eventually ascends the throne, the transition would be immediate, informed, and impossible to disrupt. Prince William entered the room 20 minutes later through a private side entrance. He stood behind his wife's chair, placing a quiet hand on her shoulder. He looked across the table at his aunt, Princess Anne. A silent understanding passed between them. The line had been held, the institutional boundary was secure. While Catherine remained inside receiving the briefing, the consequences of the standoff were already spreading across the palace administration like a shockwave. By mid-afternoon, private dispatches reached every senior staff member across Buckingham Palace, Kensington Palace, and Clarence House. The structural changes were immediate and unyielding. A fresh chain of administrative approval was locked into place. From that moment forward, any proposed modification to Catherine's schedule, ceremonial position, or access to state advisors required direct written clearance from King Charles, Prince William, or Princess Anne. The hidden pathway that had allowed informal household influence to alter state dispatches was permanently closed. Camilla retired to her private sitting room. An aide placed a copy of the finalized continuity directive on the table beside her untouched cup of tea. She read the final page twice. She removed her glasses, her face pale, and asked whether the king had truly approved every single word of the enforcement clause. The aide's answer was quiet, but it landed with devastating weight. The sovereign had signed every page. The throne room doors were no longer just wooden panels. They had become the permanent division between the informal authority she once held and the strict legal framework of the coming reign. Later that evening, King Charles visited his wife privately. He did not offer smooth excuses. or attempt to defend his long delay. He admitted that his desire to avoid home friction had allowed mistrust to deepen between the households, but he made it equally clear that when forced to choose between personal peace and institutional continuity, his oath to the crown would always come first. Then Camilla learned the detail that stunned her most. During the internal audit, when Princess Anne presented the evidence of diverted dispatches to the king, it was Catherine who had stepped in behind closed doors. Catherine had explicitly requested that no public statement be issued that would humiliate Camilla. She had personally asked Charles to preserve the Queen Consort's charitable patronages, her public engagements, and her private dignity. Catherine had refused to use the administrative victory as a weapon of revenge. That mercy cut deeper than any administrative penalty ever could. Camilla realized that the woman she had viewed as a rival had chosen to protect her when she had the power to destroy her standing entirely. 2 days after the standoff, a quiet, unannounced meeting took place in a small private study in the palace's north wing. No secretaries were present. No advisors sat at the table. No tape recorders were running. Catherine entered the room alone. Camilla was standing near the window. The defensive posture was gone. The political maneuvering had burned out. What remained was simply two women facing the immense, crushing weight of their positions. Catherine placed the altered placement card from the Westminster Abbey rehearsal onto the table. She told Camilla softly that she had kept it not as leverage or proof of humiliation, but as a permanent reminder never to let fear govern her duty. She stated clearly that she accepted the heavy responsibilities placed upon her, but she would never allow those duties to be used to diminish another person's service. Camilla looked at the card, stepped forward, and offered a full, unqualified apology. She admitted that seeing Catherine's authority grow had felt like watching her own life's work slowly vanish. She had allowed her insecurity to corrupt her staff's actions. Catherine did not offer superficial comfort, but she established an absolute boundary. Respect would remain. Public duty would continue seamlessly, but private interference was finished forever. Camilla accepted those terms. By the next morning, the private drama had reached the public square. A single photograph appeared on the front pages of major newspapers worldwide. It showed Princess Anne walking side by side with Catherine toward the throne room, while Queen Camilla stood several paces behind in the frame, framed by the stone archway. The image contained no loud arguments. It cited no private documents, yet it told a complete story to the entire world. The public saw an institution quietly, firmly moving toward its future. A brief formal release from the palace press office confirmed that the Princess of Wales had completed her updated continuity briefings. It added a brief sentence clarifying that the Queen Consort would continue her full schedule of charitable work alongside the sovereign. Public unity was maintained. Private boundaries were drawn in stone. Outside Buckingham Palace, crowds gathered near the gates. Signs were held up praising Catherine's poise and Princess Anne's decisive leadership. The crisis had ended not with a chaotic public collapse, but with a quiet, irreversible enforcement of duty over fear. Princess Anne returned the leather crimson folder to the secure royal archives, where it was sealed under state lock. The storm inside the palace walls had settled. Catherine walked forward into her expanded role, not as a conqueror celebrating a political win, but as a future queen carrying the heavy, unyielding weight of the crown, with poise, discipline, and restraint. What do you think of Princess Anne's swift intervention outside the throne room? Type Anne in the comments below if you believe her firm stance saved the stability of the crown. Type Camilla if you understand the deep pressures that drove her private fears, or type Catherine If you admire the restraint and mercy she showed behind closed doors, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe right now. Because just as the dust settled on the throne room standoff, a secret entry in the late Queen Elizabeth's private diary was opened by state archivists, revealing a hidden clause regarding Prince Harry and Meghan Markle's royal titles that changes everything we thought we knew about the succession, and you will not want to miss a single second of our next breakdown.